Okay, I think it's working all right. Seems to be. Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 26, February 22nd, 2006. We're visiting with South Dakota Co-op Hall of Fame member Robert Johnson. Bob, where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois.
And when was that?
9/29/21.
Okay. And where was your family from originally? One of the things we've been trying to nail down is ethnic origins.
Well, right here at Groth, South Dakota. My mother was a Chicago girl, and after the harvest, and when I was due to arrive, she wanted to go back to Chicago, and I was born in my grandparents' home in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay. How did your mother end up in South Dakota from Chicago?
Well, her mother and father were related to a Strum family here at Groton, and she came out here, and the Strums and my father's parents were not exactly neighbors, but did a lot of neighboring, even though they lived 10 miles apart. And Dad put his eye on my mother, Pearl, and courted her for, I think, 2 or 3 years. After the harvest, after they bet out here in South Dakota, he would go back to Chicago and do repair work and painting for my grandfather, who had, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 apartment houses. And it worked out well, and they were married. That deal that I gave you there tells the story about when they were married, and I don't remember the year now, but it's in that.
Okay. Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm the only one in the family.
Okay. And you grew up on the farm? Or?
I grew up on the farm. I went to, even though I lived 3 miles out of town on the farm, I always attended the Groton School, graduated from the Groton School in 1939.
Okay. What are some of your early memories from back in those years? Like, you remember in the 1920s, early 30s?
Well, I certainly do. The farm was a wonderful place to be a young boy that loved animals and pets. I had cats and I had a dog, and but I rode a school bus. So that was an education from the time you got on the bus at 7:15 in the morning until you got home in the evening. I remember the dirty 30s extremely well, because at that time we were living on a farm 3 miles south of Groton, and I would ride a quarter horse into town for school. And I don't remember the year, 1933 or 34. The dirt storm was so bad
Go ahead.
that they decided to leave school out early, and I had my horse in a barn about 2 or 3 blocks from the school. And when I crossed the railroad track south of Groton and 3 miles to go, I was out about half a mile, and the dirt storm was so bad that I couldn't even see the horse's mane. So I just wrapped the reins around the saddle horn, and my horse took me home to the barn. So I remember the dirty 30s very well.
Were there a lot of farmers that lost their farms around here?
Yes, there were. And in fact, the place that my father bought from an insurance company was repossessed by that insurance company. And was in a position to, I guess, put the dollar down and $1 a month or whatever he could make his payments. And we still own the farm as a family, 3 miles south of Groton.
Mm. What was your father's name? I think I knew him.
Alfred L. Johnson. Was very active in the AAA program, the PMA program, the Federal Crop Insurance Program. He was the chairman for South Dakota for the PMA program. Lived in Huron.
And your mother, what was her name?
Pearl. And just a housewife and a mother.
Was your family involved with cooperatives?
No, not because we really didn't have any back in the 20s and the 30s. So my father got so busy with the federal farm programs on the local level, and then on the district level, then on the state level, then on the national level, that he never got involved in organizing a cooperative. I'm sure if he'd been around the farm when they started organizing cooperatives, he would be very active to support them.
Seems to me, I remember hearing that that he had helped to kind of keep the Farmers Union office in Huron in order after Harold Gulseth passed away in 1961.
Yes, my father was a member of the Farmers Union, and you're right that he, I guess there was some talk about going to, was it to Brookings or wherever, but thought that Huron was the spot to have it and the place to build the office building.
He was state, it would have been ASCS chairman?
Yep.
And that was during the Kennedy administration, right?
Well, even before the Kennedy.
Before the Kennedy administration, okay.
And then up until he retired.
Okay. Let's get back to you. When you were young, what did you want to do? Did you want to farm, or did you have other aspirations?
After graduating from high school, I enrolled at South Dakota State College, and then the war broke out. When I was at State, I was a junior, and I signed up for the Navy. They had a V7 program. I had ROT training for 2 years, and then they had a program that you could enroll in the V7 program, which if you passed the tests, you'd go to an officer's candidate school. But I couldn't pass the physical because of hearing loss at that time. And I asked the fellow, what do I do now? Well, you go home and talk to your draft board. I went home, came back here to Brown County, went to Aberdeen, and I said, the Navy can't use me. What should I do? And he says, well, why don't you come home in the family farm? My father was so involved with the state farm programs that he had not much time to spend doing the actual farming. So they advised me to come home and be the farmer, and they'd put me into the 4F category, which was for farmers. But come March, I think it was, I was drafted to go for a physical for the Army. And I got into Fort Snelling, but they said, boy, you're here, I think you'd be, it's so bad, I think you'd be better off for us to have you on the farm producing food. And so I came back to the farm. and that was in 1943.
1943, okay. Now you mentioned college. That would have been what used to be the agricultural college?
No, that was the full college.
That was a full one.
Yep.
Okay.
And when I was very active in the Ag Club program, I was president of the Ag Club, and Dean Eberly, who was the Dean of Agriculture, got the idea that the Ag Club officers ought to go with him to the state legislature in the winter of 41 or 42, I don't remember, and try to be a lobbyist telling the legislators the need for the new Ag Hall. And I was surprised that the legislators didn't give us young college kids much attention. And when I went to state, I was a registered Republican, and it made me so disturbed. I went back and told some of my Ag Club friends, I'm going to change my registration and be a Democrat. The Democrats and the state legislature had more concern about an Ag Hall for State College and farming in general. And from doing that way, some of my friends at state said, well, let's organize a Young Democrat Club at State College. And that was the start of a political career for me.
Okay. Where did you meet your wife at?
In high school. I was a senior. She was a sophomore. She was born and raised about 15 miles north of Groton. Graduated from a rural school. That had a wonderful teacher. She got an excellent education in the rural school and came into Groton. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to her until I was a senior. I was a junior when she came. After a basketball game, we were up at the local cafe. I was up with some fellows, and she was up with some girls. I don't know if we were eating ice cream or drinking pop or whatever we were doing. And all of a sudden, she was gone, but her coat was still hanging on. And I put her coat on, and when she came back, she said, Bob, you got my coat. I want my coat. And I said, the only way you'll get your coat if I can walk you home. So that was the start of a courtship.
Okay.
Which lasted 4 years. When I graduated in 1939, that fall I went to Brookings and enrolled as a freshman. And when she graduated in 1941, she had a music scholarship at the University of South Dakota. And during the summer courtship, I talked her out of giving up that scholarship and coming to State College. And she got involved in the music department. But when the war broke out, and I ran into the problem not being able to get into the service, I asked if she wouldn't consider dropping out of college and coming home to the farm with me. And when that war would get over, we'd both go back and get our college degree. But we never went back to get our college degrees. I had a year left. Because our first son was born, we were married in 1943, and our first son was born in 1945 on my birthday.
Okay.
September 29th of 45. And we just didn't have the time or the money to both go back to college, always thinking that we would. Then I got more active in the Young Democrat Party here in Brown County. At the time that Senator George McGovern was then the chairman of the South Dakota Democrat Party. And my good farmer friend, Ken Holm, the two of them came to the farm and said, "Bob, you've been active in the Young Democrats on the statewide level," because I was chairman of the state Young Democrats. And why don't you run for the legislature? And I said, "Gosh, I'm young and I don't know if I'm well enough known." And they said, "Give it a try." And I gave it a try. And so I served in the South Dakota Senate for 6 years, 3 terms.
I think your bio says you were chairman of a committee?
I was chairman of the Education Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And that was at the time when, like every session, they're looking for funding for rural schools, for elementary education, for high school. And I didn't have to go to a rural school. My wife did, and she got a good education. I didn't think it was... I just felt that we needed school reorganization, so I was very active in Senate Bill 6, which was the start of the school reorganization studies. And I met with a lot of unhappy neighbors. I would come home from the session, and I had one neighbor that said, "Bob, you better get off of this kick of getting rid of our little country schools, or I'll burn your barn down." And we had words, and he never burned my barn down, and I kept working for it. And we got it done here in Groton in good fashion. Andover came in with us. Columbia came in with us, some of Claremont. Of course, we got down as south as far as Fernie and Condé. And then I was active in the Labor Committee during the legislature. And I was also had a start of the insurance business at that time, and I found out that the volunteer fire departments, like we have here in Groton then and today, couldn't get workman's compensation coverage. And that disturbed me. And so I got support from the different volunteer fire departments to get a law passed that it should be broad enough to cover volunteer firemen. At the time I was in the legislature, my seatmate, Ed Downs, who was a very prominent insurance man in Aberdeen, had said, "Bob, we need to get the school for the blind moved into Aberdeen." But he said, "If I push for that, why, I don't think I can get any support from even our fellow Democrats. Why don't you take a hold of that?" And I went to the school for the blind and saw that, boy, the facilities they had were very inadequate. And we got the school moved to Aberdeen, which I'm proud of and happy for. The big part of my legislative career as far as a state senator was when Ralph Herseth became governor. Of course, we were together the night of the election, and he said, "Well, now, Bob, when we go back, you've got to be the chairman of the Senate Education Committee." And I've made a commitment to SDA that if elected, we'd do everything we could to get a teacher retirement bill passed. And so I introduced it. We got it through the South Dakota Senate without very little trouble. But it got over to the House, and it was stalled there for a while. And I probably spent more time in the House Education Committee than I did in the Senate Education Committee, but we got it passed. And today I get teachers coming in to say, hey, thank you for what took place back in 64, I think it was, 62 or 3, I can't remember the years.
What was the breakdown of the legislature at that time? Earlier on, it had been, I remember when my former boss, Ben Radcliffe, was there were only a handful of Democrats.
Right. And in fact, the Democrats, before I got there, would do their caucus in the telephone booth. At the time we were there, we had the majority in the Senate by one. And the first year that I was in the Senate, Roy Houck was the lieutenant governor, and a Republican, a very strong one. And we disagreed a great deal, never got disagreeable with one another. And after I was out of the active part of politics, and so was he, I was interested in getting a South Dakota-based life insurance company, and so was he. And we finally got together and brought his people together with mine, and we put, this is the board of directors of the Prairie States Life Insurance Company. He was chairman of the board, I was the secretary, and that was a wonderful experience where a couple, an honorary Democrat and an honorary Republican, could get together and bring a business to South Dakota.
Okay. I see Roger McKellips there?
Yep.
And Ted Munster?
Yep,
Ted there?
right.
Okay.
And Ralph Nauman. And, fell from North Dakota. And Arnold Snortland was the chairman. He was a North Dakota graduate, and the fellow that was the director of Farmers Union Insurance in North Dakota. And before this, he became the manager of the National Farmers Union Insurance. And when he was at the national level, I was active in the Farmers Union program, and he had me get more active in the insurance program, Farmers Union insurance program for South Dakota. And when we were and then he retired from being on the Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union Insurance. And when we were finally got our thinking together, we needed a manager. And I said, I know a good Norwegian. He lives out in Rapid City. So we went, talked to him. His wife wasn't too sure that he should get back in it, but we convinced him he should be our manager. And the company has been sold now to a Canadian company, so it's not here, but we had a wonderful time working that together.
I think I played golf with him once.
Heck, you did.
With him and with Cliff Ott, who was the state manager.
Of course, Cliff was a very dear friend of mine, and had sadness in his family, as you probably know. But that was an interesting experience.
Okay. Let's delve into cooperatives here a little bit. Your bio in the Hall of Fame displayed mentions 8 cooperatives that you were active in. Could you name all those?
Well,
I know what some of them were, but
maybe I can't remember them without looking at. I can either give you a copy of the sheet, but of course, the James Valley Cooperative Telephone Company, the Groton Farmers Elevator, Northern Electric Cooperative, East River Transmission Cooperative, the South Dakota Association Cooperative, SDREA, Dakota Electric Cooperative, the Brown County Federal Credit Union, and then I was in the South Dakota Senate. I served on the, I was Governor Janglo's appointment to the South Dakota Railroad Board back in 1981. And then I was an organizer of the Northern Valley Communication Company, which is a subsidiary of James Valley and now located in Aberdeen.
Okay. I think it mentions that your first co-op director position was with the Farmers Elevator here at Groth?
The Groth Farmers Elevator.
Were those were pretty good years for agriculture, weren't they?
They were very good years. It was strictly a stock company. I got my share of stock in the Groton Farmers Elevator from my father because he was retired from doing any part of the farming or selling any of the grain. And I was very desirous to get the bylaws changed so that it would become a cooperative instead of a stock company. And it created a lot of excitement in the community. Some of the people were very doubtful that it could work to own your share of stock by just starting to dump your grain and buy your feed. And pretty soon it took hold and it was very successful. It later was incorporated with the Fernie Farm Elevator, and of course, like so many farm elevators, they needed to get bigger and bigger, and then the wheat growers came in, and that was after my time.
When did that co-op first get organized, or before it became a co-op? Was that date back?
Oh, yeah.
The early years?
I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know.
What kind of issues did you have to deal with on an elevator board in those days? You mentioned the turning it into a cooperative, but...
Well, mainly to have the key, like in all cooperatives, is to have a manager that takes on the role of managing as if he were the owner. And we were very fortunate to have that. When I first got on the board, the elderly gentleman that was the manager, heck of a swell guy, but had no desire to really increase the traffic through the driveway. He finally gracefully retired upon suggesting that he needed to. And of course, we always needed grain cars. The big issues were where were we going to market. It was a practice of doing most of the business with Benson and Quinn. And I had gone to a GTA meeting, and shortly after I got better acquainted with the rest of the directors, we were shipping an increased amount, and pretty soon, after a couple of years, I suppose 95% of our grain went to GTA.
You remember any particularly memorable people you worked with during those days on that?
August Dami, who was on the board of directors. In fact, August Dami was in the House of Representatives when I was in the Senate, and for one session we roomed together. So I knew August very well, and my father was very well acquainted with Emil Lorix, and so I, of course, got more acquainted with the board. Had an opportunity to spend some time with Thatcher when I'd get into an annual meeting for GTA, or even if it was a business trip for the elevator.
He took quite an interest in farm policy.
Oh, very, very, very active. And what he was saying satisfied me to the point that I wanted to give him any support that I could.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Northern Electric. You were on that board for 20-some years?
Yeah. I was on there from 1960 to 1982.
Okay. Now that would have been after the electricity came in here, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
When did the lines go out here in this part of Brown County?
Well, we got it on our farm south of Groton in 1943. It was the winter of 43, because we had an artesian well that a rock had shifted the line that was down 1,000 feet and shut off the water, and we had to put down a surface well. And but the Northern Electric line and the web line came up to our farm, and so I begged both of them to get me hooked up as soon as possible. And on Christmas Eve in 1943, we got hooked up for both electricity and web water.
Okay. Now, that would be relatively early compared to some places
Yes.
in the state.
Right.
You mentioned East River. Were you on that board too?
Yes.
Okay.
I was an East River board, the representative of Northern Electric, and the Northern Board elected me to be there in 1964, and I retired from there in 1982.
Okay. That would have been during the period of time when they were involved in getting base and electric going, and
Very
coal-fired power.
very
added
very
as well as
active.
the hydroelectric.
Very active. Very active.
How significant was that for rural South Dakota?
Well, it was absolutely necessary. We weren't going to be able to have enough hydropower to meet the growing needs of rural America, as well as the small towns like Groton and Fernie and Gandhi and all the rest of us that were in these small communities. So it was able to provide the transmission between the distribution cooperatives that needed electrical energy into the Brown County area or Northern Electric area.
And the need was growing pretty significantly about that.
Oh, very. Everybody was wanting.
You had to fend off a few efforts to transfer some of that power to the private utilities?
Yes. That was some of the business needs that had to be taken care of.
And then you mentioned James Valley, and that started out, I presume, primarily as a telephone company?
That is definitely we got that started. I got I have a little interesting article here that I wanted to show you. The telephone company was a mutual telephone company, the Groth and Fernie Mutual Telephone Company. And they had an elderly manager and an elderly board, had no real foresight in thinking that new technology is going to continue to change, and finally got to the point that the service was so bad and they had no money that they, instead of trying to get to be a cooperative, they decided to sell. And they sold to a Mr. Fine, who was an aggressive telephone man from Minnesota. And he came in. I don't remember what he paid for it, but it wasn't very much because there wasn't much to sell. Everything aerial, old magneto systems, 5, 10, 12 to a party line, very poor service. But Mr. Fine was determined he could upgrade it, but found out that the private money wasn't available. And then he started to try to acquire an REA 2% loan. And in order for even REA people to give him consideration, was that he was going to have to change the rate from $1.50 to something that would support a loan. And in order to get that increase, he had to have a Public Utility Commission hearing, which was held here in Groton on the second floor of our now meat market, which is down the street here. And about a week before that meeting, our Methodist minister said, "Bob, what are you doing about this telephone hearing that's coming up?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what I'm going to do." And then he said, "Well, why don't you put a cooperative together? Consider that." And that just our later preacher at the Methodist Church. Well, that was the time I got nominated for the Cooperative Hall of Fame. It said that Reverend McKenzie, who was my minister, had planted the thought in my brain that we ought to gather a large attendance at this hearing and see if we couldn't get the support of local people to be a cooperative. And of course, that was interesting. My wife and I mailed letter after letter using the church mimeograph machine at the time, making all the contacts we could. Anyway, we filled the meeting room, which was a big surprise to Mr. Fine and to the Public Utility Commission. And the commission was very interested in hearing a whole lot from Mr. Fine, asking more of us rural people, well, would the support be here? And of course, I was saying that there's no doubt in my mind that I'd been working on it for a couple of weeks, and I feel the support is there. Well, then, and the Public Utility Commission didn't give Mr. Fine that increase which he was going to need. He didn't know where to turn. And so a few of us that were instrumental in putting the cooperative together met with him and said, "Well, we want to buy you out." He lent an ear, and where are we going to get the money? Well, Ken Holm, who was a good friend of mine, was on the REA board, Northern Electric Board, and was very anxious to have a rural telephone cooperative. And Mr. Cliff Hansen, who was the manager of Northern Electric, said, "Well, we can finance that kind of a purchase, and then we'll go for the loan program," which is what we did. We finally met with Mr. Fine, established a dollar value of his. Just before the PUC hearing, an unfortunate sleet storm came along and took down most all of the area line. And of course that really put him behind the eight ball, and so he was quite willing to listen to an offer, and he sold to us. Some of the local businessmen would come to me and said, "Bob, this isn't going to be good for our town or our community." And I said, "Well, I don't know of any other way. You can't go to the First National Bank and get any money to build a telephone company. And we're in a position, I think, to be able to get a 2% REA loan, get the lines back up, get some new equipment." And it was a wonderful experience.
And over the years, you were involved in some significant modernization because, of course, communications has changed almost as much as anything in the country.
Yeah, and the first manager was a local boy, a local man. Robert Peterson was the in charge of the power plant that we had here in Groton, which was diesel-fired plant, and was interested in being the manager, but REA would not support the idea for him to be the manager because he did not have a college education. But Ken Holm and Cliff Hansen and some of us that knew of his determination, Bob Peters' determination to put together a good telephone cooperative, decided we're going to hire him anyway, even though he doesn't have a college education. And thank goodness we were right. His dedication was so great that our change from a magneto system to the new technology with, then it was at that time, are we going to build an aerial system? Bob Peterson said, we don't need these party lines like we've had. It's time to go to a single party. Of course, the REA people that would come, he says, you'll never be able to support it because the rate would be so high, you won't have any telephone subscribers. And we're a pretty progressive community, and I think it'll work. We finally submitted an application for a loan with the idea that we were going to have not only a private line, but a buried line. Because of the sleet storm that we went through, and then the talk was out, the pocket gophers will eat your line. Well, they liked some of the coating of the line, but they didn't like the copper. And so I give a lot of credit to Bob Peterson to get us going down the right road, and not willing just to accept somebody's observation who wasn't acquainted with the community. And I have said he was a diamond in the rough as far as our telephone system is concerned. Mm-hmm. And from that way, we got into the internet business, and it's gone. The managers we've had, every one of them has added a lot of dedication and loyalty and support to our cooperative. And we've got a good young fellow over there now, It's and it was a year ago when the federal the FFC wanted to come to South Dakota to find out how rural cooperatives or telephone cooperatives were progressing. Are we keeping up with the changes in technology? And the Public Utility Commission suggested that they come to Groton for the meeting and to see firsthand what we had, and found out that we were probably one of the best telephone communication system in the nation.
Was it fairly common for the rural electric co-op locally to work with the communications co-op or the telephone cooperative? Yes,
it certainly was at the time, and it seemed like such an ideal way to go. If we wouldn't have been able to do that with Northern Electric, we probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground for months and months, maybe years.
Still might be party lines out in the country.
Right.
The private utilities, like U.S. West, or they didn't have a great deal of interest of serving rural areas.
Not at all. Yeah. And of course, that was the main objective, that we wanted to have a reliable service and wherever we could in the country, like they had in the city.
I think you and I remember you talking about your frustration as a kid and having relatives from Chicago lording it over you.
Yeah, you must have read that.
I did.
That they would come from Chicago and visit, and we didn't have electricity, and we had running water because we had an artesian well, and we had a 32-volt electric power, so we had 32 volts. So we didn't have toasters, and we had a bottle gas refrigerator, and they would just frustrate me so much when I was small, that when I got active in this movement of REA and telephone, I was determined that we could have as good a service as they had in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. You talked about some of the individuals or other folks from this general area. Art Jones, did you work with him?
Oh, yeah. Art was, of course, chairman of the East River Board at the time I was on the board. Often we'd ride to an East River meeting together, and of course, Ken Holm was on the East River Board before he became the Undersecretary of Interior, and when he got that, that's when I was appointed to the Northern Electric Board. And Art was in the Senate at the same time, and we'd ride together occasionally to Pier. Mm-hmm. And so we had some pretty strong, determined rural people to upgrade community living.
Mm-hmm. I remember another fellow from up here, Keith Taylor, was on.
You're right. He was on our telephone board, and was chosen the year before I was chosen to be on the Hall of Fame, Cooperative Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. The board, at a board meeting, when the manager said, I think we ought to take part in this, see if we can get a couple of our directors on. And I said, well, we certainly can't take two at a time. Let's take one at a time. Let's just see what we can do to get Keith on. And the committee that made that decision agreed that he should get that honor. And then Doug Idol came back. He says, well, Bob, we're going to send your credentials in. Well, don't you think it could be better if we wait a couple years? He said, no. And the board said, no, we want to do it now. And the committee, who I didn't know, didn't have a chance to lobby. And that's my plaque back there.
Yeah. As you look back on all of your cooperative service, what attracted you to cooperatives? You've spent an awful lot of time working with them.
Yeah. Well, there's always that challenge there. It's got to work. And it seemed like you put enough effort into what you have a desire for, why it can work.
What achievements are you most proud of? You probably have talked about some of them, but amongst all of the things.
Well, one that I am proud of is our Methodist Church is in the process of studying and thinking about building a new church. And, of course, finance institutions are not overly anxious to loan money. And at least the banks that we had locally here didn't want to talk to us. I was on the Prairie States Board at the time, and I went to a board meeting. That was one time Roy Hawk says, oh my God, Bob, we don't want to loan any of our money even to your Methodists out there in Groton. And Arnold supported me and the rest of them, Ralph Nauman, and they finally said, well, let's give it a try. And I'm real proud that I was able to put the financing together so we could build a new Methodist church.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got a call from Governor Bill Janglo and said, Bob, I'd like to have you consider being on the South Dakota Railroad Board. I understand. I didn't know him that well. But I know you've had some experience with farmers' elevators, and know the value of a railroad system to transport grain and livestock. I said, well, I guess you got to have a Democrat on that too, so I'll be willing to be one of them. And that was a challenging experience. And
it's kind of difficult to imagine where we might be at if the railroads had just been allowed to go as they could very easily have done at that time.
Right. And of course, my legislative experience, I have great memories of that, and that's always challenging. And anybody who has ever had the privilege of serving as a legislator will tell you that those challenges, that where are we going to get the money? After you get it, where are you going to use it? And I thought, because of my size of family, having 6 children, I thought it'd be good to have some kind of a scholarship program. I worked on that for one session. I got it into committee, but we couldn't get it out of committee because, well, where are you going to get the money? So that didn't work. It later came. And then when Ralph Hurst had said, the only thing I want you to get done this session is to get a teacher retirement bill passed. And that was extremely challenging, and that's something I'm sort of proud of.
Mm-hmm. certainly, you talked about budget issues and funding for education probably will never cease to be a problem.
Never. Well, and I know the Cowboys would hate to hear me say that those families are just going to have to get together and put a system together that's adequate to take care of the education needs of our young people.
Mm-hmm.
So the reorganization work is still with us.
Yep. Let's go back to your family. You have how many kids?
We have 6 children,
Okay.
5 boys and a daughter.
Okay, where are they all now? What are their names and where are they at?
Well, Van, the oldest one that was born on my birthday, when he got out of high school, I don't know. And his mother says, "Well, you're going to go to college." Well, I want money. I got to go to work. And one day after he'd gone for a long walk, he says, "I want to go to Europe." And I ought to get back to tell you that we got involved in the Farmers Union foreign exchange program. And that's when I was in the legislature. And got a young fellow by the name Wendell Whelan Kruger. And that was a wonderful experience. Marvel, like in that letter, will tell you that Marvel picked him up in a very cold February night in the railroad depot in Aberdeen. And the train got in earlier than Marvel thought it was going to, but here he was in a cold depot out in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And he was with us for 9 or 10 months. And it was a wonderful experience for all of us, including my family and me and he. And anyway, when our oldest son, Van, came home from having gone for a walk, said, I guess I want to accept an invitation from Whelan to go to spend a year in Germany. So we made that arrangements. He went over there and worked in an eyeline filament factory and decided I don't want to have to be punching a clock. When he came back, I said, "Well, you know what you want to do now? Yeah, I want to go to law school." "Ooh, really?" "Well, there's only one place you can do that in South Dakota. We better go to Vermilion." So then he, of course, went through that. And he lives at Sioux Falls now, and he works. He was a lobbyist for several years, and now is instrumental in the work of a powder tech company in Watertown and Webster. Our second son, Kent, who graduated from here, went to Dakota Wesleyan University, graduated from there, found a wonderful rural girl to be his wife at the time he graduated, and then he finally ended up working for a 3M corporation for 25, 30 years, retired a year ago, came back, and they bought our farm site. Our third son, Drew, because of my friendship and involvement in politics and the friendship I had with George McGovern, George gave him an appointment to West Point. And he went there. After a couple of weeks, he called and he says, "Dad, I don't want to be a Johnson general. I'd like to come home." I said, "What are you going to do then? You go to school?" He said, "Sure, I'll go to school." "What's Van doing?" I said, "Well, I guess he's still going to law school. I'll do that." And of course, that's what he's done. He's a lawyer in Aberdeen now. Jay, when he was ready to go to college, he was willing to go to Northern, started there and participated in their track program. And when he was ready to graduate, one of our local bankers said, "What's Jay going to do now when he graduates?" I'm damned if I know. And he says, "Well, our bank is looking for boys that have got an ag background and a business degree from college." So he worked over at Tracy, Minnesota for 4 or 5 years. And he called one day and asked, "How long you and Mom going to keep the insurance agency?" And I said, "Well, I'm never going to retire." He said, "Why?" "I got to get out of this ag loan business or I'm going to have ulcers." And, well, let's give it a try. So he came back about 14 years ago, bought the agency, and I still told him I never want to retire. So I come down here almost on a daily basis, or whenever I want to, leave whenever I want to. And some of my golden age friends now say, "We envy you that you got a place to get out of the house." Mark, our fifth son, good athlete in school, good student, went and played football at Northern, got his industrial arts degree, and now, well, he built our twin home in Groth a year or two ago, putting up spec homes. He built a couple of those here in Groton. Now he's helping build one in Aberdeen and doing our farming. Our daughter, who I've told others who have interviewed me, she was a cheerleader for us. And she started at Northern. And then her 2 lawyer brothers said, "Why don't you go to the court reporting school, because that's really a good profession." And she did that, met her husband in Sioux Falls, and then she worked for a law firm. Her husband was from Detroit. They went back, and she worked for a law firm there that had 100 lawyers in it. And then her husband wanted to get more. He went to the university and wanted to go back to the university and get more education, which they did. But they live in Watertown now, and she works for the South Dakota Cancer Society.
Okay.
That's the 6.
Yeah, one of my questions was going to be what you've been doing since you retired, but since you didn't retire, I can't ask you that question.
I keep involved in different activities here in town, but for last 4 or 5 years, we would notice a need for a transit system here, and our attorney, which is next door, and I often have coffee in the morning, come back here together, and often thought, we can provide a youth center, good baseball facilities, a new school. We need to help get the elderly out, provide a transportation system for them. So that's been a project for a couple of years now, and it's going very good. Slow to start, but so that I've been involved in that, involved in my church work, and involved in Kiwanis activities, and making the best out of visiting our family. We're a very, very close family. Last week, we went with my son and daughter-in-law that was on the farm to Menominee, Wisconsin, where his oldest daughter, who is married, and her husband is a physical therapist for some nursing homes, and she works in the local school there. They have 3 children, and so just trying to keep up with family. We got 17 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, and so and at Christmas time, 4th of July time, we almost everyone to the last one gets together for a day or two.
What kind of advice would you give someone today that wanted to be involved in the rural community here?
Well, there are opportunities out there. You got to be willing to go after whatever your goal might be.
And would you describe yourself as optimistic or pessimistic about the future? You sound like an optimist.
I am. I'm optimistic, and I've had some friends say you're too much of a liberal, but it takes a little bit of a liberal attitude in order to make things happen. I've been lucky.
Anything else you'd like to comment on before we close here?
Well, you've got that other information. You take that one along with you. That I was so surprised when this came out in the paper today. I knew that some of the story was going to get in there, but then to take two sheets here.
Okay. Well, they just finished doing this then, huh?
Yeah, this is today's paper.
Oh, well, you're spending all your time being interviewed lately, huh?
Yeah. When Paul Cassell came on. Well, how that happened was a friend said, Bob, I got a friend in Mitchell that's bringing George McGovern up to hunt pheasants. And George says to my friend, well, maybe he could find if Bob and Marvel would be at home. And Marvel called, and I said, you darn right we'll be home. And then I called Paul Cassell, our publisher, and I said, Paul, I'd like to have you come over when George is here and take our picture. And when he got over there, he'd been after me for the better part of a year to put together a biography, and I kept saying, no. You can write one later. And when he agreed to come, that's when I agreed, all right, we'll do an interview. And he came over for the better part of an afternoon, and it just came out. That came out yesterday, his daily paper, and then it was in his paper.
Okay.
The Groton City said, congratulations, Drew, my attorney son in Aberdeen, said good luck. And James Valley had a little note, and then Jay, unbeknown to me, all this just says, thanks, Dad, for your help in the community. Makes me pretty humble.
Yeah. We've been visiting with Bob Johnson, Groton, South Dakota. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.